It's the Lent season. It's the season, the weeks leading up to Resurrection Sunday, which this year is April 20. It's a time in which many Christians set aside time to reflect, to be renewed in their sense of Christ and their commitment to Him, to remember the way of the cross. Christ walked for us. And so as we're going through Sunday after Sunday, we're just tracing the last hours of Christ's life before the cross. And tonight, or today, we want to look at Luke chapter 22, starting with verse 39. It's the story of Jesus in prayer in the garden. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to his disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No, no more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, Am I leading a rebellion that you've come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts. You did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. I have an outline of the message entitled, "He Took the Cup," included in your luminoso. May be helpful to follow along as well. Have you ever been in a situation where you really experienced, either from yourself or from somebody you were with, utter anguish? Just depth of the heart, breaking the gut, anguish or torment. As I was reflecting on the message, I thought back a few years prior to our moving here in 1989. We got a call Sunday afternoon. There had been an accident. We rushed to the hospital. One of the young ladies of our church, teenager, had been driving her pickup, Dad's pickup, with her sister, who was younger, and with their nephew, their older brother's son. So 2 sisters and a nephew. Somehow she lost control of the pickup on the highway, wrapped it around a tree. Her injuries were pretty intense. She had severe head injuries, but the other 2 were dead. They kept that from her for the first couple of hours to try to treat her first, but the time came when they could not leave her questions unanswered. She kept asking, "What about my sister? What about my nephew?" And finally they gave her the news. They didn't make it. The scream that came from her voice, her heart, her insides, was utter anguish, torment. She was the driver. They were dead. That pales, I think, when we think of the torment of soul, the anguish that Jesus Christ must have faced in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says in Matthew chapter 26 these words, verse 38, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." I mean, he is so overwhelmed with the anguish that comes from the realization of what is before him in the coming hours. The beatings, the trial, the cross. He says to his disciples, his closest friends, he said, my soul is overwhelmed. It's overwhelmed. It's killing me. It's killing me, guys. Now, we don't often picture Jesus this way. We see Jesus moving through the gospel with purpose and with mission. He confronts boldly the leaders of the Jews, and he tells the storm to stop, and it does. And he feeds people, he touches people, and they're healed, and he speaks boldly. But at this moment in time, these last hours of his life, he is overwhelmed with what is to come. And I don't want us to miss that, because, we kind of say, oh, he's the Son of God, he just did all this. But but he's a man. And he knows what is facing him, and he knows how it's going to hurt. And he knows the pain before him. He knows that he's going to be stepping out into a place of separation from his own Father. The depth of anguish we cannot begin to grasp. But I want us to reflect on that, because it's important for us to see what's happening in these hours and to appreciate what Christ is doing, what he's done. The depth of anguish, overwhelmed with sorrow. So he's preparing for a battle. And so, first of all, the first part of the message, I just want you to note how he's preparing for that. He goes to pray. The place is a garden. It's the Garden of Gethsemane. Now Luke, each of the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, include different details. Luke just says the Mount of Olives. The other gospel writers say the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane was on the Mount of Olives. It says Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. Now that's interesting, as usual. So it must have been that this was a customary thing for him to go there and pray. And obviously Judas knew where to look for him, right? So he went there. This must have been a place of prayer for him. That's where he went. That's where he took his disciples. Now I've got a map. I apologize it's not more clear, and I'm sure in the back you think that's worthless, but this is the city of Jerusalem. And you see the ruggedness pictured here. Here's the Mount of Olives. Kidron Valley is a rather deeply cut valley there. This whole area is very hilly, rocky, mountainous. It's about the same elevation as El Paso. The city of Jerusalem is about 3,500 feet elevation. But all around is deep valleys, mountains, hills, not Colorado-type high mountains, but pretty rugged area. So right here we have the temple. Garden of Gethsemane is right here, outside the old city walls, towards the base of the Mount of Olives. Next map. Here it lists what most Bible scholars view probably to be the area of the Last Supper. Okay? The southern part of the city. Here's the Kidron Valley, which they had to cross. Here's the Garden of Gethsemane, Mount of Olives, around here. If you continue here, you can see Bethany. Who lived in Bethany? Mary, Martha, Lazarus. So just over the hill is a little town of Bethany. Jesus often stayed there when he was moving to and from Jerusalem. Temple here, Last Supper here. A lot of the trial took place in the center part of the city. Over here, Garden of Gethsemane. From here to there, probably about a half-hour walk with his disciples. They've had supper together. They've celebrated the Passover. And he says, okay, let's go. The hour is coming. And he takes them to a place where he often went to pray. Then Jesus went with his disciples, Matthew says, to a place called Gethsemane. Gethsemane means oil press. There are lots of olive trees in the area, Mount of Olives. So, and even today, there are olive trees there. There's a garden there. He said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. So there's the location, okay? Now his friends, what have they been asked to do? Pray, right? But his friends fail him. I'm just setting the tone, setting the context here. His friends failed him. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Luke puts it this way: when he rose from prayer and went back to his disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." It's just a side note in the story, but it's interesting. Part of Jesus' suffering is experiencing even his own friends letting him down. They can't even pray for an hour. Even his own friends, in one sense or another, are not there for him. And I just want to note, this is a sidebar, it's not the main part of the message by any means. But human beings, in one way or another, will always disappoint you. Right? They will always let you down. That's life. Don't put your trust in other human beings. I think another sidebar is this. I wonder if Jesus were saying to us, "Hey guys, you too have a mission and you're asleep. Spiritually speaking, wake up." You know? And maybe this Lenten season is the time for that. So his friends failed him. But he was not alone, because the next part, and Luke's the only one that mentions this about the angel. An angel comes to strengthen him. An angel strengthened him. Luke simply reports, without fanfare, without a lot of emotion, just an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly. His sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. It was like the Father saying to him, I know, son, your friends, they're not there for you, but you're not alone. And he sends an angel to minister to him. So that's part of the picture. Jesus in anguish, his friends over here sleeping, an angel comes, he continues to pray, and now with such intensity that he's sweating blood. Here is prayer. This is what he prays. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Now, what does he mean by cup? Okay? I mean, this is the heart of the message right here. We've got to understand what he's talking about when he says the cup. So, understand the cup. How's that used in the Bible? Sometimes it can mean salvation in life. Okay? In Middle Eastern terminology, the cup often referred to your future. Okay? Your fate, your future. For example, Psalm 16 pictures it in a positive way as salvation in life. It says, Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. See, what the psalmist was saying is, God, you're my cup. The cup of life, cup of salvation. You are it. You're my future. It's all wrapped up in you. So it's pictured in a positive way. Another one is Psalm 23. Remember what it says there? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. So the idea of the cup, meaning our life, it overflows with blessing, in the presence of our God. So in some places, the word cup is used as that positive thing. God is the source of life and salvation. But in many cases, the word cup is used as a description of judgment. And specifically, it usually means the cup of God's wrath. The cup of God's anger against sin. God's wrath. For example, Psalm 75. It is God who judges. He brings one down, he exalts another. In the hand of the Lord is a cup of foaming wine mixed with spices. He pours it out. And all the wicked of the earth drink it down to its very dregs. Or Jeremiah. Jeremiah spoke a lot of God's judgment just because of the history, the time in history that he lived and ministered. It was a time of captivity for the people of Israel because of God's judgment against their sins. Jeremiah 25, for example, says, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me. Take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. And when they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword I will send among them. So I took the cup from the Lord's hand and made all the nations to whom he sent me drink it. Wow, it's a horrible picture. Or here's Isaiah. Awake, awake, rise up, Jerusalem. You have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath. You who have drained to its dregs the goblet that makes people stagger. The cup of God's judgment, the cup of God's wrath against sin. And say, well, that doesn't sound like my God. I don't know. People like to think of God as the God of love, and he is. In fact, Psalm 103 says, our God is slow to anger and abounding in love, right? And he takes our sins and he removes them as far as the east is from the west. He is slow to anger. Yeah, we have a God who is slow to anger. Praise him for that. Slow. He is so patient. Over and over throughout the Old Testament as well as in the New. New Testament says it as well. God is patient, not wanting any to perish. So he's constantly showing blessing. He's constantly calling people to himself all the time. Psalm 19 says the creation is calling out all the time the glory of the Lord. See, and he's calling us. He's calling us. But the truth also is, if we continue to reject that, the offer of life, the offer of salvation, then eventually we will drink the cup of God's judgment. And that's a horrifying thing. And it was horrible for Jesus when he was in the garden that night and he prayed, Father, if you are willing, can you take this cup from me? That's what he was facing. The cup of God's wrath against sinful humanity. A righteous, holy God. Now, when God gets angry, it's not like us. We get angry when we're offended, right? Or, somebody says something, we put up with that. We right away rise up and we get 2 inches taller and, it's hair on our neck. Or our kids. Often we discipline our kids in anger. Don't do that. Discipline has to be done in love. It has to be done with firmness and with truth. But when you discipline with anger, then you're doing it more out of your own anger than you are what's best for the kids, right? Now we respond, we get angry. God doesn't get angry like that. When we talk about the anger or the wrath of God, it is God's settled hatred of sin. And he constantly calls us and he says, you don't have to have this. Come to life, come to forgiveness. But at the same time, his hatred of sin isn't lessened. And Jesus faced that night. And he said, the cup, Lord, is there another way? Now, do you think Jesus really thought there might be another way? No. I mean, he knew what was coming. So it wasn't so much that he was trying to get the Father to find another way, as much as him doing battle against the temptation to bail and the tendency to respond out of his own anguish and to still then submit to God's will. You see, we think the battle was won on the cross or the empty tomb. But in a very real sense, the battle was won in the Garden of Gethsemane. Because if you were looking from the outside, you'd say, man, if Jesus is falling apart in the Garden of Gethsemane, what's he going to do when the whips start falling? What's he going to do when he's nailed to that cross? If he can't handle this by himself, wouldn't you think that way? He is in anguish. But what happens is, it was in the garden, in the presence of his Father. The battle was won. And then he could face his accusers with peace, with silence. He didn't have to defend himself. They weren't taking his life. He was laying it down. He could go to the cross, totally submitted to the will of the Father, because he had done the battle in prayer. Battles are won in prayer. Do you know that? It's in prayer on our knees that we submit to the Father and to his will and to his ways. And then we can go into the battle because we're ready, right? I hope that makes sense. If you've ever been on a cruise ship, one of the fascinating things is when they go into port and you think, man, this big, huge vessel and this little dock, and throw out the rope, hook to the ship, wrap it around something on the pier, the port, dock, whatever, and then they start drawing it in. Now, they don't draw the pier to the ship. They draw the ship to the pier until it's fastened there. We often think of prayer as kind of bringing God in line with our agenda. You know, God, if you do this, and, you know, prayer is pulling us to his agenda. Understand what I'm saying? And that's what was happening in the garden. Not that he was not willing to go that way. He knew all along. He'd been telling his disciples for months, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to be tried, this is what's going to happen to me, I'm going to be beaten, they're going to put me in. He knew that. This wasn't a surprise for Jesus. But in the anguish of the moment, he needed to be knelt before his Father. Okay, your will, Father, your will. I'm ready. And so that's his prayer. Father, your will over mine. Your will, not mine. Father, if you are willing to take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. He went away a second time, Matthew says, and prayed, my Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away from me, unless I drink it, may your will be done. See, I guess we got to realize how important these moments in the garden are. We could read through the story and say, oh, yeah, I'll get it to the crucifixion. That's the heart of it. Yeah, that is. But it's important to walk the full distance with Jesus through this process. What it was like with his friends, what it was like when he was alone in the garden, what it was like for him to feel the anguish of the coming suffering, and then what it was like to stand tall and go. And do what he came to do. And there's where we'll go next week. With the trial, and then the following week, crucifixion, and the following week, April 20, Resurrection Sunday. All right, that's where we're going. But I want to stop here in the story and just remind us that now it's our choice. It's our choice. And here's what I see as our choice. The cup of God's wrath is still a reality. You're going to see that in just a minute when I read from Revelation. Now you have a choice. I have a choice. We can choose to drink it ourselves, or we can choose to accept the offering that Christ gives. You can choose to drink it yourself. Here's what Revelation 14 says. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. There will be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast in its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. Now, we're not going to get into, what is the mark of the beast and, all that kind of stuff. That's for another time. But the point of the matter, obviously, is that those who align themselves with the evil one, who choose to go against God, his will, and his ways, will someday, if they remain in that place, drink from the judgment of God. And it's going to be a horrifying thing. You say, well just a minute now. I believe God is a God of love, right? Hell, I'm not sure about that. Well, listen, I don't like to talk about hell, but I would be amiss if I didn't give you the truth, right? And Jesus spoke about hell often. I mean, Jesus spoke so much about salvation, life, love, all those kind of things. Yes, but it's all in the context of the fact that we're sinners and we need salvation. And without that salvation, we have hell. And he spoke often about the suffering that is to come for those who are eternally separated from God. He used images of fire that never goes out and worms that don't die and no rest and all those kind of things. You say, well, I'm not sure God would do that. Well, It's interesting, the movie Noah just came out, right? I'm sure there were people in the days of Noah when Noah was preaching and talking about what it was to come. And they said, flood? I don't really think that'll happen. But it did. And I'm sure there were people in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah when Lot was calling, even his sons-in-law said, judgment? I don't think that'll happen. But the fire fell and the cities were destroyed, right? Now there are people today who say, well, I don't think that'll happen. I wouldn't bet your life on it. All right? God is the God of judgment. He has proven that. He says it in his word. If we want to take him at his word, we got to receive that truth. The great city split, Revelation 16 says, the great city is talking about Babylon, the forces of those pitted against God. Split into three parts. The cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Revelation is a picture of what is to come. So you have a choice. You can go through life and reject God, reject his ways, and someday the cup will be yours. And every time you have a lustful thought, drip, drip. And every time a harsh word, drip, drip. And every time a prideful action or a stretching of the truth or any other type of disobedience, drip, drip, drip. And the cup is being filled. And I invite you, every time you pour yourself a cup of coffee, you think of the cup. Think of the cup. Every time you get a glass of water, you think of that cup. Now, that sounds morbid. Stay with me, please. But the idea is, Christ has taken that cup. He's taken it. So every time we pour a cup of coffee, we think, Jesus took the cup of God's wrath against me. Wow. When you pour your cup of coffee in the morning, it ought to just ignite you into praise. Right? Not because of the caffeine. It was he took that. I don't have to take that. He took the cup. Think of that. The cup of God's wrath against sin. The cup of God's righteous judgment against sin. One option is, okay, we can just reject God and then we take it ourselves. Or we can receive the offering Jesus has given. And that's my prayer for all of us. It's my greatest desire for my children, for my grandchildren, that they will know this. It's my greatest prayer for you. John 3:16 says, or 17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned. Whoever does not believe stands condemned already because they've not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. If you've not believed in Christ, you've not received salvation, in other words, accepted the truth of what Christ has done, confessed your sin and asked him for forgiveness, then you're under judgment. That's what it says. But 1 John 2 says, my dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anybody does sin, that's all of us, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the atoning sacrifice. Very interesting word there in the Greek language. It basically means he is the one who turns away the wrath of God. He is the one who has taken the judgment of God. Not only for ours, but also for the sins of the world. And so the offer is ours. There is a cup of judgment. It has been taken for you. You don't have to take it yourself. John 1 says, but to all who receive him, who believe in his name, he gives the right to become children of God. The Bible talks about a new heart. Wesley's aunt got a new heart yesterday. Can you imagine waking up in the morning in ICU and knowing that your heart is failing and that your future is so uncertain, and then by the end of the day get the word that there's a match for your heart, and by nightfall have a new heart? Wouldn't that be amazing? The technology just astounds me. A new heart. That's only a picture. That's That's what God does with us. When we receive Christ, we accept his salvation, his forgiveness, and we submit to him, as we sang earlier. I surrender. I surrender to you, Lord. A new heart. Takes that heart of stone and gives us a heart of flesh. Right? That cool? So that's our choice. That's our choice. And I just want to close with a quote from Max Lucado. You find it here. In his book, And the Angels Were Silent. It says, the battle is won. Speaking of Jesus. You may have thought it was won on Golgotha, the hill on which he was crucified. It wasn't. You may have thought the sign of victory is the empty tomb. It isn't. The final battle was won in Gethsemane, and the sign of conquest is Jesus at peace in the olive trees, for it was in the garden that he made his decision. He would rather go to hell for you than go to heaven without you. Wow. He'd rather go to hell for you than go to heaven without you. Wow. So in the place of judgment, in the place of the cup of God's wrath, he offers you peace. He offers you true life.